Thank you so much. We got lots of people joining. So for those of you just joining, feel free, I'm gonna have this PowerPoint up and talk a lot. But if you wanna pipe in and just ask questions, I'm not the most formal of people. Also not gonna have an eye on the chat. So just feel free to unmute if you're what does that thing mean? It's a weird Italian term. And with that, let us get started. Could you enable screen sharing?
Yes, let's see.
Wonderful.
I don't see anything that would stop it from screen sharing. Do you not have the option at the bottom, the green up arrow?
I have the button. It just says host disabled participant screen share.
Okay, let's see, advanced options. There we go. All right, you should have it now.
Wonderful. Cool. Will this let me? It won't not. Okay, this is fun. I don't do a PowerPoint much. All right. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Raphael di Merisi. I am here from the Middle Kingdom on what is our first sunny day in a long while. Are you getting the full screen version of my PowerPoint? Yeah, cool. I don't know if you're getting the it's giving me the behind the scenes view. Anyhow,
we are seeing the slide preview, the whole PowerPoint window.
I wanted to do the
Not
full
presenter mode.
There we go. Great. So I'm talking about the duel. Dueling is not a thing unique to Italy in any sort. The idea that two people, usually men, resolve their dispute via violence is a thing that's existed pretty much throughout every culture throughout history. What we see, though, in largely starting in northern Italy in the early 16th century is a specific codified way for upper class gentlemen to engage in this behavior that then proliferates across Europe. So eventually the French get real wild about it. The Italians have less duels than the French do once you get to the 17th century, but they're all pulling from Italy. Right, Italy is very much a cultural hub at this point in time. It's very fashionable to have an Italian at your court, right? For instance, we know the fencing master Salvador Fabris, where he's from Padua, so it's 10 miles west of Venice, is the fencing master for the King of Denmark. And we see, right, Vigiani, it's another Italian, a little earlier, it's a fencing master for the King of the Holy Roman Empire. So having an Italian who knows how to do violence is a common thing at courts throughout Europe. There's a pin in my sleeve somewhere. I can't find the end of it. Anyhow, so first, let's look at there's two kinds of violence. So these terms are coming from a gentleman named Rory Miller. He's a modern combatives instructor. So there's social and there's asocial violence. So asocial violence, right, not being social, is kind of what you think about when you hear about the street, right? It's someone mugging you. They're not worried about there being a crowd. They don't care if anyone sees them. They are here to murder you or steal something from you or do something nefarious. Social violence is what the duel is about, right? The duel is not purely a dispute between two people, right? It's largely a bubbling up of disputes between groups, as well as you're going to have witnesses to your duel. People are going to talk about your duel after the fact. You're going to be known as a duelist, right? It is all about your status in society. It is not purely, I want to murder this person. So we're going to talk about this a little bit later as well. The idea of dueling comes from this honor culture that exists at the time. So they're all very much pulling from Aristotelian virtue ethics. Honor, right, is everything. If you go around and you don't have a good reputation, you don't have business, you don't have an income, right, you can't feed yourself. So, right, like nowadays, it isn't terribly difficult to relocate somewhere new and to start up and get into business with people who you don't personally know. But at this time and place, right, even large European cities are in like the tens of thousands of people, right? I live in Chicago, right? We have millions of people. So you essentially know everyone that you interact with on a daily basis, unless you're like a traveler. So if you are known to be dishonorable, if you're known to have a bad reputation, people are not going to engage with you socially. This also applies to members of your household, right? So if your son is a vagabond or your daughter is seen as not chaste enough, right? That will reflect poorly on you. And by you, the literature is very much targeted at men. Although we do see a couple instances of women getting into duels. Not so much, though, in the 16th century in Italy. Right, if you don't have social standing, things are going to go poorly. So lots of times the duels not necessarily be just a result of two people fighting with each other, but will also be that someone has insulted the honor of someone in your house. Something to note here. So in the SCA, as we engage with it these days, the loyalty, the allegiance, the fealty you have generally goes up the chain in a singular direction, right? You might swear fealty to your knight who swears fealty to the king, and that's really it, right? You might have a barony in the middle of that. There's not generally a lot of conflicting streams. This is not the case in period, right? Folks of the upper class will often have land in multiple territories, right? So that land is controlled by various barons or dukes or whatnot. We have several instances of people getting into duels, even though their local lord tells them not to do it and that it'll bring shame and they'll be outcast, right? Because their personal honor is more important to them than fighting in a war for their country. Right, as well, the more duels your soldiers engage in, the less soldiers you have. So we do see some attempts to try and curb it in the military, and those attempts do not work. That said, we have these ideas of honor, both nowadays as well as then, and then there's the reality on the ground. Turns out not everyone followed the book to the letter, and we have people calling folks out on this in particular. So while we might live in it, like one of the things the SCA tries to do is have this idealized notion of what dueling culture might have been. The actual line between a street brawl and a duel in lived life in 16th century Italy might have been less clear than we like it to be now. Something to note, so dueling is very important as well as your honor. That does not mean you have to accept all challenges. So if you are a noble lord and some peasant comes up to you, you can ignore that peasant, right? You do not have to engage with someone of a different social status than you in a duel, right? This is a formalized thing. Someone of a lower status, oh, do we have a question in the chat? To the death. Cool. I'm going to answer this question in a second. So you can ignore, right? Someone of a lower social status cannot impinge on your honor, right? Nowadays, I can sue somebody regardless of how rich or poor they are. I have to pay my lawyer, but outside of that, I could just go about it and ruin that reputation. In period, if you are of this status or that status that is lower than mine, right? If it's higher than mine, I have to go deal with it. But if it's lower, then I can kind of ignore you, right? And this applies to certain professions. So like your executioner, while paid really well, is not going to be regarded with a high social status, as well as like innkeepers. And then of course, right, the great other of the medieval and Renaissance period, my people, the Jews, right, were not really engaging in dueling culture with the, as we call it, Goyish population and the Gentile population. Largely the legal matters, right? Dueling is kind of seen as an extension of the legal matter between Jews and Gentiles. Don't happen too often, largely because they live separately, right? Especially in Venice, where we have the ghetto, where that word comes from, where the Jews were sectioned off. So occasionally there's things between that, but if two Jews got into a fight, the Gentile courts would kind of just let them be, as well as the other way around. To answer Alfgar's question, were duels in this period always fought to the death? The answer is no. Duels were fought to incapacitation. So we're going to get to the rules of how to fight the duel in a little bit. Just something to note, they were not fought to first blood. That's really a thing that comes out of the Napoleonic era, because they were losing too many officers. But if I hit you in the leg and you cannot walk anymore, I don't have to finish the job, right? The fight is over. My honor has been satisfied. That said, medicine was terrible. So people died a lot from their wounds, especially if you get hit right in the torso by a thrust. Like there's not a great survival rate from that. It's not zero, but it's not great. At the same time, we do have people surviving amputations on a regular basis. So there's this notion that like everyone had to wear gloves all the time because they might get gangrene from the slightest nick and die, like they had immune systems. Anyhow, duels often fought to the death, not always. If I stopped you from being able to fight, the fight's over. There we go. Right. In addition to you being able to refuse duels from people of lower social status or different religion, etc., right? Women are not considered a part of dueling culture. We do see women engaging in violence, but not so much in the formal duel, especially with a man at this period. That said, earlier in like the SCA's timeline, we do see this. So like we have the Walpurgis manuscript I-33. So in the 14th century, we do see like monks teaching women how to fight with sword and shield, as well as we see like I want to say 18th century example, like Julie de Aubigny. I can't pronounce French. We see women engaging in duels later on, but especially if you do it by the book in the 16th century, women were not engaging in duels as well as children. Is anyone else having trouble seeing the slides?
There is a little box. Now there are two boxes on the screen.
Is there one on the top right?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Yeah, that's just the Zoom is so strange. The top right one is just like my camera. Anyhow, yeah, the middle one was the chat. Can we see the picture now?
Yep.
Wonderful. Cool.
Yeah,
So,
you don't need to keep, if you don't want to keep your chat up, I can just let you know if there are any questions in the chat.
I think it's fine. Okay. But thank you. So yeah, if a child challenges you to a duel, right, you can ignore them. Like, they're small and cute. They're not that dangerous. Child doesn't necessarily mean 18 back then, but yeah, if like a 12-year-old points a sword at you, you do not fight them to the death. That's, no, don't do that. Something to note, I'm gonna move this box down so it doesn't get in the way of the picture. I really like this picture. Your honor on the battlefield is regarded differently than your honor on the dueling list. So nowadays we might think that the battlefield is the more important one, right? You're serving your lord, you're serving your country, as opposed to just fighting someone one-on-one. But it's seen as the opposite in period. The reasoning for this is that if you lose the battle, it's not necessarily your fault, right? Someone could have made a bad choice. The weather could have been bad. You could have been outnumbered. There's a wide variety of reasons that your country or barony or duchy or whatever lost today's battle, even if you fought honorably. If you lose the duel, that's on you, right? The point of the duel is to try and make this fight as even as possible. It's just you, one other person, right? You're starting out of measure. The swords are already drawn. There's no surprises. So this, as we talked about earlier, are people ignoring their local lord's insistence of not getting into a duel, right? Because there's a war going on, right? Especially in early 16th century, you have the Italian Wars. But, right, people's personal honor is seen as a higher level, and thus they will weaken their side in the upcoming battle by getting themselves mauled in a duel. So, how do you challenge people to a duel? You don't do it by slapping them with a glove. This is an idea that like kind of comes to us in the 19th century, and by then it's even like a running joke. This is not a thing anyone did, period. So there's a few things that you would need to prove to get yourself into this duel. So the first thing, right, you suffered an injury. There's multiple kinds of injury, right? It could be a physical injury, not some people with a glove, but like if someone struck you, right, or they threw you to the ground, or they cut you, or in some way like got into a fight with you at the local pub. As well, right, it could be an injury to your reputation, right? They could say something nasty about your child or your spouse. Additionally, right, this was things that were hard to prove via credible witnesses. So they did have a court system. It was fairly robust. People used it all the time. The duel was there to solve problems that couldn't be captured by courts. But if you could just settle this thing like with lawyers, right, if it's just a property dispute between you and your neighbor, you're probably not going to get into a duel about it, right? You're going to have a legal case. As well, right, there's the idea of double jeopardy is not new to us in like modern day, like I guess 18th century America even, right? Like even if a court case went poorly, you cannot then challenge someone to a duel to make sure that you end up winning even though you lost this court case. Lastly, someone has to dispute a claim. So if I say, right, so if someone comes up to me and tells me that I cheated them at business, if I don't respond and I just kind of sit there and keep drinking my ale, or I guess we're in Italy, keep drinking my wine, there's not a duel. My reputation might get tarnished by that, but if I know that this person is going to murder me and that I have no fencing skills to speak of, I really don't want to get into a duel with them. So I'm not going to challenge them on the injury they have caused to me. Right? People talk their ways out of duels all the time. The point of dueling had a lot of different off-ramps to try and make sure this thing didn't happen. That becomes less so as time goes on. So like leading up to the French Revolution, I think it's like a third of male French nobility died in a duel. But again, French love duels. Italians enjoyed inventing them, but like your average citizen, right? And by citizen, I mean like upper class land owning male, didn't get into a duel in their lifetime. They probably took some fencing classes and knew how to dance, but this was not so violent a society that everyone is getting into a duel left and right. So there's different ways to call people out on being a liar. Some of these are more serious. Some of these are less serious. Right, and like the legal texts of the time talk about all of them, but some of them have like a little more disdain for a few of these. I'm not going to read these all out. But this was, right, even though it's kind of an extrajudicial thing, this was a process, and there was a way things were done that lots of people wrote lots of books on how to do it. And this is kind of an overview, right? Depending on the town in Italy you're in and the decade, things are going to change slightly. This is essentially like the kinds of ways in which you can tell people that they're a liar and then start the duel. Being the person who says you lie is going to matter a lot in a little bit. The next thing, so if I see that someone, so if I say that someone is a cheat and has stolen money from me, they issue a mentita and say that I lied. Right. The thing I then do, right, so it gets a little confusing, but as the party who is saying the thing that got challenged, I issue a cartello. Right, I issue some sort of proclamation that this person is a cheat, that I will fight them in this duel. Depending on when and where you are, this takes a variety of forms. So the thing to note is that duels you didn't just hit someone in the face and then go out back and duel. That's a brawl, right? You had about 40 days to train. These are legal affairs. You got all your papers in order. You had your friends try and tell you to cool off, or your friends try and tell you not to cool off, and who your friends are. So if I am saying that I was cheated out of money, I'm going to issue something to the other party via my lawyer. This can be mailed direct or delivered directly to their house. It might be signed by a notary. If I'm in a place where dueling is either legal or just not prosecuted, I might post things up on the walls just to call this person a liar, right? Kind of think of those like Old West wanted posters, kind of like that kind of deal, except I'm not wanting this person, right? We're still going to fight it out, but I'm telling the whole town how terrible this human is. So, right, once the cartello has been delivered, you have a little bit of time. This is to do a few things. First of all, you need to get in shape. We have some instances of people who don't know how to fence, getting into a duel, showing up on the maestro's doorstep. So Achille Morozzo, for instance, one of the great Bolognese fencing masters, tells us how to teach someone how to fence in a very short period of time, as well as Giovanni Dal Gocchie, kind of like the last Bolognese master. So Morozzo's 1530s, Dal Gocchie's 1570s. Essentially like, okay, if I need to teach a complete beginner and they have to go fight a duel for their life, you're going to use these two techniques and nothing else. So not everyone is an expert swordsman getting into this. As well, right, you want to get your legal affairs in order. If you didn't have a will, you wanted to write that, figure out who's going to have what. Additionally, you need to procure everything. So the duels, the person issuing the challenge, the person who wrote the cartello, not the person saying that you lie, has to provide the supplies. So sometimes there's a public armory that you can have access to. But if we're fighting with rapiers and my opponent doesn't own one, I have to make sure that they have something. If we're fighting on horseback, right, you have to make sure that everyone has a horse and it's like roughly the same quality of horse, right? That the swords are the same size. That if we're wearing armor, which is less and less common the further into the 16th century you go, but you see it, right? Fury is fighting duels in armor in about 1400. Right, you have to make sure all these things are there and that no one is being treated on anything, right? You need to arrange that you have a doctor on there or on site. As well, you need to figure out the location. So the challenger, the person issuing the cartello, the person saying this person is a cheat or whatnot, has to decide the place. So the place, the Campo Franco. The thing to note here, the duel is not set up in favor of the person calling someone out. It is not in favor of the person issuing the cartello, right? So if they choose their best bud's backyard and all of their friends are surrounding it, everyone is going to know that this isn't legit. And winning well is more important than winning, right? We see the same thing in like tournament culture today in the SCA of you can win the tournament and have everyone complain that you're a rhino afterwards, you didn't take any shots. But there's the other person, they came in like third or fourth, but they did really well, and everyone's gonna celebrate that person at the end of the day. You wanna be that second person, right? This is all about reputation. So if you, right, throw pocket sand at them, and everyone knows, oh, that's the pocket sand guy, you're gonna have the same social, right? It is not worth it if you don't fought this duel. People are going to think bad of you. They aren't going to engage with you in commerce, etc. So back to the land. So you need to find a spot. Sometimes if the local lord had some land that wasn't being used, you could use that. It's generally in a secluded area, although sometimes we do see more high-profile duels being fought, like in a piazza slightly outside of town. If you can't find someone who owns land to let you use some of theirs, sometimes you'd use a lamacchia, right, for public land, kind of like the village green, right, where all the cows are grazing. As well, so you have this staccato, which is different than staccato. You have the rings, think almost like a boxing ring. There's a bunch of rules as to how the dimensions of it. It has like 2 layers of rope. If you ran into the ropes, you lost, right? They had a ring out function, which is not a thing we see happen much, because if you get into a duel and then immediately run for the edge of the rings, right, and edge of the rope, like you are not going to be viewed well. Finally, the duel, right? I'm not entirely sure where we have the modern notion of duels happening at dawn. It might be like holdover from the Regency era. But at this period, duels are being held a little bit before dusk, and they end right once the sun has set. So if both people are standing, which was not uncommon, and the sun has set and it's dark and we can't see each other, we do not fight it out until we all die. We realize that things have been settled and we go our separate ways. As well, the other piece, so the Persian, oh, I see another comment. What about lantern shields? As long as both people have one, it's fine. So the thing to note, so the person issuing the cartello chooses the place. The person issuing the mentita saying you lie gets to choose the weapons, right? This includes armor as well as if there are horses. I'm not familiar with the lantern shields. I know Alfieri in like the mid 17th century talks about fighting with a sword and lantern. I have not seen it anywhere in the like 16th century literature I have seen. The other thing to note is like this is an overview, right? There's always exceptions to these rules. I'm talking like a 100-year period across multiple different states. These things weren't that static. Anyhow, so the person issuing the cartello gets to choose the land. The person issuing the mentita chooses the weapon set, right? This is the place, right? You want to be the person choosing the weapon set. So if you know that the other person is terrible with a longsword and is a great rapier fencer, you might get them to fight you longsword. Not so much later 16th century, but earlier 16th century, right? We're still seeing Marozzo and the Anonimo Bolognese, right? So between 1520 to 1550, people are still fighting with a two-handed sword. Right, there's the coup de Jarnac, is the famous duel, right? Where there's this sword and buckler, and the guy practiced one trick shot to the person's hamstring. So if I know that I'm really good at this weapon set and that person's really bad at this one, right, I can set it up that way. This is created intentionally to deter people first from like talking smack in public, right? So if you're walking around saying bad things about folks and they call you a liar, now you might not be able to fight with a weapon that you're comfortable with. So I know at least in the rapier side in the SCA, I don't know as much about the armored side. We tend to bring our, it's kind of a bring your best scenario for most tournaments. But in a duel, it would be matched weapons. They'd be the same length. They would, right, we both have the same exact armaments, you know, within reason, right, they're going to cost you too much money to get a sword that was 2 inches shorter or longer. You wouldn't necessarily have to do that. So there's a few ways to win the duel, or I guess lose. So if your opponent doesn't show up or they're particularly late, they have forfeited this fight, right? It's dishonorable, they're cheating. So if anyone's ever read Miyamoto Musashi's Book of the Five Rings, so in Japan, he talks about intentionally showing up late to duels to throw his opponent off. That might have worked in like Japanese honor culture, but it is seen as less than honorable in Italian honor culture. As well, right, the defendant can confess. So if I was saying that you were a liar this whole time, and then we get to the Campo Franco and I repent, right, I can then get out of this duel because I see that the swords are sharp and scary. We talked about the sundown one. The other ones we've covered a bit. And then finally, right, both people can die. This happened a lot. Swords are real pointy. Medicine is really bad. Right. There's times where the person who wins the duel, right, who's able to walk off the dueling list and incapacitated the other person, ends up dying from their wounds. And the person who lost the duel, right, who was stuck on the ground, does not get gangrene. So just being able to walk away is not always everything. But again, right, being able to win well is the most important thing here, as well as giving people chances to go, hey, this is a terrible idea. This picture, by the way, is from a really interesting duel that's fought, I think, the 1530s. They're fighting they're fighting queso swords, although intentionally with one of them being shorter, with an armored glove on the left hand. And essentially the whole town, I believe Florence, goes to watch this duel. So sometimes duels are very private affairs, and sometimes everybody who's anybody goes to, you know, the piazza outside of town to watch this fight happen. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Reputation really is all the thing that matters, the only thing that matters. There's really this sense of like putting it all on the line, right, risking it all as well. We see discussions of people keeping duels illegal because they know that, you know, the hot-headed young men are going to do the thing that's just slightly outside of the realm of the law. But if we make that thing legal, even though they're going to do it anyway, they will find an even riskier thing to do. So we might as well let them do this thing, right? Think about like two guys playing chicken driving down the highway, right? Same kind of deal. As well, we see multiple scenes. So in like modern media, there's a trope of the wife or the girlfriend, or thing like West Side Story tells Maria's telling Tony not to get into the fight. We often see the opposite happening in period, right? We see someone in the household's honor is disdained. The guy does not want to go out and fight, and his wife is the one pushing him to go and fight for their reputation. Additionally, right, again, on the note of winning well, if someone has fallen at this point in history, it's generally bad to go to the ground and murder them. That's different depending on when you are. So like Fiore, for instance, who's writing about 100 years earlier, right, early 15th century, does show us multiple plays of you go to the ground, you pull out your knife, you stab them. This is not the case in upper class 16th century dueling culture. You'd even be patted down before the duel to see if you had any hidden knives on you. So if you both had a knife on your belt, you both had a dagger in your hand, that was fine. But if you pulled out like a secret knife and then won, you would have lost the duel. And lots of times, right, if you violate the rules of the duel, the seconds who are there, so you'd have someone backing you up, right, they would, be inspecting the weapons. If you were sick or couldn't fight that day, they would fight in your place. Part of their job is to see if someone breaks the rules and then execute that person, right? And it turns out, like in instances where you already have life on the line, violating the rules of that come with the penalty of death. Same goes for someone who's dropped their weapon. So you see like some disarms happen. That's a way to win a duel, but I can't then keep attacking the person once I have both of the swords. Something to note about the historiography here. So the language will get a little muddled, and we kind of like to separate, right? People in period really like to separate the classes, but this happened less clearly than they might have liked to have thought. So there's very much an idea in dueling culture of honor is only something that applies to the upper classes, and that those peasants over there are having a fight, but we're having a duel, and that makes us impressive, right? And this is the same time that there's a lot of like identity crises, right? The guilds are going away, the middle class, the merchants are rising in power. Right, by this point in like Italian history, if you're a knight in Italy, even by like the early 15th century, you're not really fighting much, right? It's not like the French or the English. You own land and then you hire mercenaries. You might still have the same title, but that meaning changes over time. So poor people did get into duels, right? They did have fights where they prearranged thoughts and fought it out. We just have less accounts of that. In Italy, doesn't mean it didn't happen. That just means that people didn't write it down as much. So although our discussion so far has been about like, rich male citizenry, it's important to note those weren't the only people engaging in structured forms of violence to resolve social disputes. I talked about this earlier, right? In most places, dueling is illegal, right? There's lots of rules about it. The church really doesn't want you to get into a duel. The chances of you getting prosecuted for a duel are very low, especially if you fought well, right? If you fought dirty, they will kill you. But, right, if you held yourself honorably, it was just kind of a like gentleman's agreement. We see like in later period, for instance, reading a book like 19th century German pistol dueling. Of like you might go to prison for like a couple months, and even then you get to like go out to the bar in the evening. So it was a thing you weren't supposed to do, but also everyone is taking fencing lessons and learning about this thing and is prepared for if they ever get into a duel. right? I mentioned this one as well earlier, right? It's a fair fight, right? The weapons are matched. The people aren't necessarily the same, right? You can't make them both equally in shape. We do see some discussion of like, if you're old enough to walk with a cane, people can't challenge you to duels anymore. But they have to have the same armaments. There's no hidden knives as well. You can't have any magic talismans on you. This one sounds a little silly nowadays, but it was huge back then. Right. This is a little bit before the witch trials really kicked off in the 17th century, but even still, the idea of folk magic was prevalent. People were really worried that their opponent had cast a spell on them or had made some contract with the devil to make sure that they could win this fight. So we see like the no magic talisman rule pop up a lot, and that kind of indicates that like I haven't found a lot of instances of people doing it, but it's a weird thing to write down that much if no one is doing it at all. Finally, it's important to die a good death. So leading up to the duel, you talk a lot of smack about the other person, right? You call this person a liar, and you issue a public statement about how terrible this person is at business, or how their wife was caught with this other person. But especially later on, like in the later 16th century, not so much in the earlier part. Once the fatal blow had been struck, you would often stay with your opponent till they died, and then you would talk about how great of a person they were after the fact. This might seem a little weird because you're just talking smack about them the day before, but right, if I beat up some vagrant, or right, if I take on someone who's not deserving of their status, it makes me look worse. Right? I want to say that I fought someone who was honorable, who was of equal status to me, because that boosts me as well. Right? This is I want this. Right? If I end up dying, I want to be treated well, and people say nice things about me. So, fighting well, presenting yourself well, right? All of this we talked about at the beginning of the lecture is social violence. And right, more than you're living through the duel, your social standing was the thing that's the piece of utmost importance here. Anyhow, here's a bunch of books. I can post these in the Facebook event if anyone wants. I also wrote an article a bit ago that I posted to my blog that I can link as well. It's like 40 pages that talks about all of these things more in depth. But yeah, that's all I got. Do people have any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask. Cool. Well, thank you all for coming out. Hope you all, we got someone. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. So yeah, thank you all so much for coming out. This is like one of my favorite topics to talk about in the SCA's period. So if people want to hit me up, I'm also the Society Deputy for Historic Combat. So I'm going to be doing what I can to spread this knowledge and see what are these rules we can't bring into our forms of combat.
Thank you very much. This was really interesting.
My pleasure. Thank you for hosting.